When I got to the age where I was finishing high school and starting college, I started going to lots of parties. I started drinking a lot, trying to be around people that did that same sort of thing.
When I was 9 years old, my dad had an affair and he cheated on my mom and he left us. It was always a difficult relationship. My dad was also an alcoholic. So he would tell me that he was going to do something and then he wouldn't follow through with it. So there was a lot of hurt and a lot of pain in that relationship.
So it really wasn't until shortly before I met Megan that I wasn't able to be happy in that for whatever reason. And I think it was at that time that God was calling me to come out of that lifestyle. So I really started to look for, like, where would somebody be that I could trust, that I could go to, that could give me some guidance. And ultimately, a friend of my family had pointed me to the Miles Christi religious order.
So I remember in college just feeling an emptiness and like a longing that just wasn't being filled, and I didn't know what it was, but I always thought that it was partly because of my relationship with my dad and feeling like he wasn't there. But it was bigger than that. It was God. It was not having a relationship with God. In college, I met Ben. He was just starting to get excited about his faith, and so it was the first time I met someone that was Catholic and excited about it and who knew a lot about the faith and why the church teaches what she teaches. And so as I got to know Ben, God used him to teach me more about the faith and more about him.
When I met with Father Patrick, it was something where I was able to get spiritual direction. I felt comfortable basically sharing with them, the different struggles that I was going through. It was the grace of God that entered into my life in a new way, and it really started me on the journey that has led me to where I am today. I brought Megan along to the different activities, like the conferences for study and prayer.
I started to grow in my faith, and God was teaching me and giving me all these graces. There was such a sense of peace, and I felt that emptiness being filled in a way that I didn't even know. About a year after we were married, my dad had a stroke and he was in the hospital, and he was in Pennsylvania. And shortly after that, he had another stroke, and so then he couldn't talk and he couldn't get out of bed, he couldn't move. But there was a lot of decisions to make about his care, and it was very difficult and confusing when we were talking to the doctors. I called the Miles Christi to ask them for their direction, and I talked to Father Gonzalo, speaking to him about the situation with my dad and what we should do. He was so clear on what the church taught and what we should do. I could make decisions. I felt confident making decisions that were the right decisions and the moral decision to make to help my father in his end-of-life care.
They just encouraged us to tell him that we love him, to speak to him about the faith and about God and how God loves him.
Amen.
And I just gently encouraged Megan to go into the hospital room with her father and try to forgive him for everything that had happened between the two of them.
I was nervous and kind of unsure about it, but I did feel like it was what God was asking me to do, although it was going to be hard. I knew it was going to be hard. So when I went to visit him in the hospital, it was just me and my father in the room, and my father was on a ventilator, and the doctors had told us that he couldn't hear and he wasn't responsive, and he probably wouldn't know that I was in the room. His eyes were closed, and I couldn't tell if he heard me or not. So I started to talk to him and tell him about how difficult things had been growing up and how I was frustrated with him, but how I forgive him for all those things. I forgive him for all the pain and all the hurt. And when I said to my dad, "I forgive you," he opened his eyes and tears started rolling down his cheeks. And I knew that he definitely heard me. And not only did he hear me, but that he knew what I was saying, that he knew that I forgave him. So It was only God's grace that made it possible, and it's a continuous thing that God is always calling us to more.